Can't call him an alcoholic. So where we left off at is Bill having those two conversations, one with Lois and one with Dr. Silkworth. Bill was trying to find some work at this time and get some income, and he had an opportunity to become involved in what was going to be a proxy fight in Akron, Ohio. And if successful, Bill would have been made president of this company, and it was connected to the rubber industry. I don't remember exactly what the name of it was, but I know where the building is because it's still sitting there today. And so Bill goes to Akron, and as the story goes, and we all know this story, the proxy fight fails. They lose out to a group from Chicago that had more ties in the Midwest than these guys from New York. And so they end up losing. So the guys that Bill is with are going back to New York, but Bill has nothing to go back to. And so he tells them that he wants to stay and see if anything illegal was done to give them the advantage in the proxy fight. So right before Mother's Day, Bill is in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, a lobby that many of us in this room have been in that lobby. And Bill is pacing, one end to the other. Down the hall, the bar. Can hear, y'all know that sound, don't you? Y'all know that sound, right? Man, if I just go in there, I'm by myself, I could like maybe like have somebody to talk to. Ain't that how it always start? Some insane thought, right? Like I'm gonna have somebody to talk to. That's like me getting off work. Now, I know that for 16 consecutive years, I've gone to the bar on Friday morning and my paycheck been gone by noon, but not this week. But I could stop by there just to see what everybody do. Y'all know how it go. This thing is so powerful and it's so subtle. Maybe I could just have a glass of ginger ale. Huh? Glass of ginger ale. How about that, right? Bill thought back to Armistice Day when he went into the speakeasy with the guy from the gun club to have a ginger ale. Until the bartender said, "Drinks on the house." And having told that man his story, all the horror, the terror, everything he lost, all his stuff, and the guy saying to Bill Wilson, you're a miracle. I know people like you. They're locked up or they're dead. You're sitting here in a sea of booze and you ain't drinking. He said, man, you're an exceptional human being. Until drinks on the house. And that same man watched Bill bring a drink to his lips. The man looked at Bill and said, dude, after all you just told me that alcohol has done to your life, how on earth could you drink that drink? You must be crazy. And Bill Wilson looked at him and said, I am. Hotel lobby, Akron. I could go have a ginger ale. Down the hall, church directory. He goes up there and he looks. Sees a name on there, the Reverend Walter Tonks. When Bill was a kid in Vermont, the word tonk was, they just take walks in the woods, they called it a tonk. Must be a sign from God. What do you say? His sanity returned. Calls this number, series of phone calls, get in touch with some people trying to find what? Somebody to talk to. I want to hearken back real quick to something. Bill in the hospital bed. I want to work with alcoholics. Want to. Doesn't want to, right? Fast forward. Lobby of the Mayflower Hotel. I need, y'all feel that? I need to work with an alcoholic. There's a difference, isn't there? I need to work with somebody. What did Lois tell him? You still sober. So he finally gets in touch with Henrietta Cyberling out at the gatehouse, married to one of the Cyberlings, rubber family, very wealthy. Many of you have been to that gatehouse. Talks to Bill, I'm a rumhound from New York, I need an alcoholic to talk to. Her response, manna from heaven. Manna from heaven. I remember my friend Harmon V. in Akron, who was chairman of the board of Dr. Bob's house. I served as a managing trustee of that house for a long, long time. And every time something happened at that house, Harmon used to say, manna from heaven. I remember my boy. Just wanted to say that. Henrietta contacts Ann Smith. Now, Dr. Bob had been going to the Oxford group meetings. This is a doctor in Akron, a proctologist. Had been going to Oxford group meetings for 2.5 years. Bill been going for 6 months. Dr. Bob was drunk every night. Bill was not. Stay with me. What's the difference? Same group, same information, but it ain't working. Doc getting tight every night. Dr. Bob grew up in Vermont as well. I do not believe that to be coincidental either. Roland Hazard, Shep Cornell, Abby Thatcher, Bill Wilson. All these cats from this town ain't nobody never heard of. Dr. Bob, and if you've read The Doctor's Nightmare, when I do the book study, we don't stop at the end of A Vision for You. We then do The Doctor's Nightmare. We do not exclude one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what a powerful story it is. And a man who suffered, his family suffered. There was a joke in the medical circles in Akron. Dr. Bob was a proctologist, and he actually overheard somebody say it one day. The joke was, you bet your ass when you go to Bob Smith, because you never know if he'll be drunk or sober. Dr. Bob, right? So Henrietta got a hold of Ann, said, I got a guy to talk to Bill, bring him over. Annie, it was the day before Mother's Day. Annie said, well, I ain't going to come today because he just come up in here with a potted plant, and he's more potted than the plant. We had to take a rain check. So the next day, they set out. I asked Sue about this because she was there. And she said he was not in no good mood. He said, I can give it 15 minutes. 15 minutes, that's it. I don't want to eat. Dr. Bob said, I don't want to hear from him and nobody else. So they go out to the gatehouse. And of course, 5 hours later, they leave. What happened? They came in to eat. And Dr. Bob, hung over from the day before, Dr. Bob suffered badly from the shakes, We know the story. Dr. Bob takes sedatives so he can go to work. His hands can be steady so he can make money to get drunk at night, so he can go to sleep, so he can get up tomorrow to take the sedatives to go back to work. And this is the cycle that he lives in. And Bill sees that immediately. Bill like, hey, Dr. Bob couldn't even hold his fork, right? And he's embarrassed. There's people in the room. Hey, man, why don't we eat later? Why don't we eat later? Let's go talk. Dr. Bob said, you just don't know how much that meant to me. That he saw that, right? And he helped me. And so they go back in the room, and now Bill is armed with them pieces of the pie. Bill knows what the problem is, what to do about it, and now how to make the approach. So he shares with Dr. Bob about alcoholism. Told his story. Right? Dr. Bob is bobbing and said, y'all know how it goes. Like, what happens when we come together? People who their entire life who've been doing this. Watch him in a meeting. Watch him. Right? So Dr. Bob's identifying. He let Dr. Bob talk a little bit later on. Doc share some of it. See, and that's what the historical significance. How does that play out today? When I'm talking to somebody new, okay, so I'm talking, talk to me. Because when you start telling me about you, you start to internalize that. This is stuff I don't tell nobody. I don't tell nobody how I drink. I don't tell nobody that every week I sit in a room and I swear to God I ain't doing this no more, and I do it the next day, if not that day. I don't tell people that. So you encourage them to do that. They start to internalize this based on their own experience. Where are we trying to go here? We're trying to go here to that deflation at depth. We're trying to reach that point of desperation that is the inspiration, right, to get enough honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness in place to go forward. Is it relevant today? You bet it is. How you do a 12-step call, huh? The way has been shown. So they come out of that room. Doc says to Ann, can we take him home with us? He understands. Will come from the heart, reach the heart, don't it? So Bill gets to the house pretty soon, and some things start to happen over the 8:55 hour and more. I want to talk for a minute because Dr. Bob refuses to make amends. We know the story, right? Goes to Atlantic City, gets drunk, comes back, and tells Bill Wilson, I'm going to go through with it. Had a surgery to do that more. Bill said, I didn't know if he was talking about the surgery or what he was talking about, right? So Bill got him a bottle of beer. This is in the good old days. Your sponsor bought you a beer. So he could steady his hands, and Dr. Bob goes in and does the surgery. Him and Annie are waiting. Hours go by. They like, he's drunk, right? And, of course, in Doc, they find out surgery was successful, didn't take that long, and that he had gone out and began to make the rounds of people he had harmed and to start the amends process. That's what he meant by I'm going through with this. So now we got Doc. He's sobering up. They sitting at the table at 8:55. He looked at Bill and he said, he used to call Bill Willie. And he said, Willie, I don't think this is going to work with just me and you. We need to find us another one. So they called up to Akron City. They said, yeah, we got one for you. He a bad one. Been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. Just beat up 2 nurses. They like, that's our boy. And they go in there to see, hey, number 3. Y'all seen the picture, the man on the bed, Bill D. A legend in Akron. I knew some guys that he sponsored. And they told me stories about, he always wore suspenders. His old attorney He went to meeting every night. The boys used to pick him up, take him to meeting every night. He never went in a meeting and said, I'm the third member of AA or anything like that. He was just Bill D. He was just Bill D. How can we learn from these people? There's nobody different in here. I don't care if you stand up here, if you sit out there, if you're the greeter at your group. I don't care what you do. Everybody here is the same. That's what makes this work. I knew people who knew. They didn't talk about this stuff. Hi, how are you? How may I help you? That's what I heard. So old Bill D, they talked to him, they shared, they followed the pattern. They shared their experience, didn't talk about him, right? And at the end of it, he said something that threw them, that they weren't ready for. He said, well, I can certainly see what God has done for you guys. And I can also tell that you guys know the truth about this alcoholism thing. He says, and I know God helped you, but He won't help me. It's too late. But thank you for coming. And they didn't have an answer for that. That just threw them, right? And so the best thing they could come up with was Bill said, hey, can we come back tomorrow? They needed to go regroup. So Bill D said, sure, man, I love that. Hey, listen, if this is helping you guys, and they explained to him, hey, this is how we're staying sober. He said, if this helps you guys, come on back, right? Bill D's old, he was a deacon, head of the Sunday school at his church. He was a man who knew, right? You know more than you understand. Right? You know more than you understand. Oh, Bill D knew, but he didn't understand. They came back the next day. His wife, Henrietta, was there. They come in. He said, that's them. Them two right there. Said, they the ones that know. He said, fetch my clothes. I'm going with them. And he never drank again. July 4th, 1935. We marked that as the beginning, right, of the first group. I got 3 of them. Some things were going on at the house. I want to talk about Ann Smith for a minute. I asked Neil about Ann Smith because he lived in that house. And he called her Miss Annie. He said, oh, Miss Annie. He said she was as much a mom to me as my own. Every morning, Dr. Bob and Bill got up. She took them in that living room. And she read to them from the good book. They had quiet time, prayer, and meditation. There is some misconception in here that we came up with this. There's some misconception in here. I sit in meetings and listen to people knock church people, make fun of them, call them earth people. Where do you think we got this? Bill Wilson was 6 months sober. His eyes were still red. Dr. Bob, good Lord, with a week. As Alcoholics Anonymous grew, Annie did 2 things. The group in the morning began to grow. The guys would come to the house in the morning. You got to remember, this during the Depression, nobody was working. Dr. Bob used to say he believed that was providentially arranged. Nobody could say, well, I got to go to work. I can't come over there today. Wasn't nobody working. But they come to the house. They call it Ann's spiritual pablum. She spoon-fed them prayer meditation, guidance, seeking knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. Take them 12 steps. There they are. And you could take about 3 or 4 of them out of there if it ain't for Ann Smith. Wanted no credit. Bill Wilson asked her to write the chapter to wives. She said, my job is to work with these families. So Bill wrote it. When a new person would come in, the first thing he would do is say, bring the wife to the house. And they would get her in there, tell her, okay, this is a spiritual deal here. Okay, so what about you? You perfect? No. Okay. Start working with the families. Okay. When Lois Wilson came to visit, Ann already had this going on. Got Lois indoctrinated to take it back to New York. It was already going on. Family recovery. Bill Wilson called her the mother of AA. Probably the finest tribute I've ever heard. If you ever get a chance to get the CDs from the 1950 convention in Cleveland, listen to what Bill had to say about Ann Smith. The mother of AA. So it's time for Bill to go back to New York. Bill goes back. Got something going here in Akron. We got us a couple up in New York. Hank P. come in, and our southern friend came in. So we got a little action going on both ends. And we're with the Oxford group. Some things started to happen over time. The Akron crew grew a little faster than New York did. Bill said there were several reasons he think for this. He said he really believed years later that the emphasis on prayer, meditation, and seeking guidance was the difference between Akron and New York. He said there's more people staying sober in Akron. He said New York, sometimes we was too analytical. Where in Akron, they just was taking action. So Akron grew faster than New York did. 1937, some stuff started happening. The first thing happened was the Catholic Church. Now, I want you to understand something. 1937, there was no sober Catholics in New York and one in Akron. Okay? But some things started happening with the Catholic Church. And this is what happened. It pertained to the Oxford group. The Catholic Church, actually, the Pope came out and said that Catholics were forbidden to go to the Oxford group. Okay? So, Bill was terrified by that. Because he knew that we needed to be inclusive of all. Also at that time, the Oxford group in New York was watching these drunks. They really liked Bill Wilson. This is what the Oxford group in New York thought of Bill Wilson, an immensely talented, gifted man. But he's wasting all his time on drunks. He's not going to be successful, and when he gets tired of fooling with them, he'll join in the mainstream Oxford group, and he'll be of much use to us. So they really wasn't feeling this. So what they did is they started to try to impose group guidance on the alcoholic members. Like we gonna limit y'all sharing, we gonna give y'all some direct, and the alcoholics immediately rebelled against that, trying to control us up in here, right? So you got two things going on. The thing with the Catholics, you got that going on, and they said, okay, that's it, we out. 1937, New York alcoholics leave the Oxford group. Back in Akron, they stayed. Things continued to progress, and a guy came in from Cleveland. He's a rather abrasive fellow. Bob is laughing because Bob knew him. Listen, like both of my sponsors, they knew him good. But Bill Wilson said the biggest ball of fire that Alcoholics Anonymous has ever seen. And his name was Clarence Snyder. And Clarence Snyder came in Alcoholics Anonymous, and Dr. Bob was his sponsor. And Clarence was a go-getting kind of cat, man, you know. So as a few guys started coming in Cleveland, they was coming to Akron on Wednesday night. The Oxford Group meeting was at the home of T. Henry and Clarice Williams over on Palisades Avenue in Akron, Ohio. That house is still there, and sometime in Founders Day they opened it up so you could see it. But that's where the Oxford Group meeting was. So everybody was coming from Cleveland. They hanging out over to T. Henry and Clarice's house, and everything is cool, right? They busting the house up, but you know they was cool with it. And here's what happened, man. All these people coming over there, and Clarence got the boys from Cleveland. And on the west side of Cleveland is predominantly Irish Catholic. And these Irish Catholic guys went to the Oxford Group, and they came and they told Bill Wilson, oh, no, we can't do that. We cannot do that. Dr. Bob was not crazy about this. Clarence said, we got to pull out. Dr. Bob said, we owe these people our lives. Clarence said, I ain't arguing that point, but we can't come here. And out they go. They started a meeting. At this time, the manuscript was out. And the manuscript was entitled Alcoholics Anonymous. So Clarence didn't start a meeting saying this is the alcoholic squad of the Oxford Group. He started a meeting, he named it after the manuscript, Alcoholics Anonymous. That meeting took place on Stillman Road in Cleveland, Ohio. It's actually in Cleveland Heights. I know where that house is. In the home of a very new member of Alcoholics Anonymous. His name was Abby Goldrick. And it was in the basement of Abby Goldrick's house. And the meeting grew and grew and grew in Cleveland. And they got too big for that house, and so the meeting actually split into two groups. The Borton group, there was an industrialist in Cleveland, his name was E.T. Borton, and he offered a room in basically his mansion, and that became the Borton group. And then the other group is the Orchard Grove group, which is in Lakewood, Ohio. Both of those meetings running today. So these two meetings start of Alcoholics Anonymous. Late in the fall of 1937, another huge thing happens. And what that is this. Bill comes, he's still trying to make some money, he's out here on some business, come to Akron. And him and Dr. Bob sit in the living room of the house at 855. And they said, let's count how many people are sober between New York and Akron. And the number was 42. Now, we're talking desperate cases of alcoholism. We're talking about people out of asylums. We're not talking about somebody who got in trouble at work for smelling like beer. We're talking about desperate, given up for dead cases of alcoholism, 42 of them sober over 6 months. Ann Smith come in the living room. And they realize something. It works. Bill said a new light has entered the dark world of alcoholism, but it works. We got 42 of them that are sober. Ann said, let's get on our knees and give thanks. I have sat in that house hundreds of times. A lot of them by myself. And my favorite memory from AA history concerning that house was that day when Bill Wilson walked over and looked out the window and said, how do we get this out there? how do we get this out there? And they got on their knees and they gave thanks. So Bill decided that we needed to do some things to get it out there now that we know it works. We need hospitals, we need paid missionaries, and we need to write a book. Now, Dr. Bob was skeptical about these hospitals and missionaries, but he was totally on board with the book because they didn't want this to be a word-of-mouth program because they knew it was going to change. As a matter of fact, people was already changing it. So they called a meeting, 18 men in Akron. And Bill pitched it to them. These are your original AAs. 18 of them. And they was like, oh no, we ain't going for none of this. We don't need no hospital. We don't need no missionaries. And Lord, no, we don't need no book. Listen, if somebody needs some help, we'll find it, we'll do it. That's where they was at. Dr. Bob jumps into the conversation and really, really, really pushes for Bill. Really pushes for Bill. And says, look, Bill's right. We got to do this. A vote was taken, I believe, and I have to ask Gail, but I'm pretty sure it was 10-8 was the vote. It was 10-8 to go ahead with these things. So Bill goes back to New York, and this is another whole story I ain't going to get into to try to raise some money to do this stuff, right? And he talked to some rich guy, and the rich guy blew him off, and he went to his brother-in-law, was Dr. Leonard Strong. Dr. Strong was married to Bill's sister, Dorothy. And Bill is complaining about, the stinginess of the rich. They don't want to give us nothing. We got something going here. So Dr. Leonard Strong said, well, I knew a girl whose uncle worked for John D. Rockefeller. His name is Willard Richardson. So I'm going to call, see if we can get an audience with this guy. So he called. Willard Richardson remembered him and agreed to meet with him. So they went up there and they met with Willard Richardson. He listened to the story. He said, y'all might be onto something here. He said, Mr. Rockefeller might have some interest in this. So let's see what we got going here, right? So some people got involved. They had a meeting in the chamber of John D. Rockefeller's boardroom. When they came in there, one of them said, Mr. Rockefeller was just sitting in that chair. Bill Wilson heard him, jumped in there. Get close to the money, man, right? And there was a guy at that meeting whose name was Albert Scott. He was the chairman of the board of trustees over to Riverside Church. And Albert Scott said, wait, whoa. He said, I hear y'all, what y'all doing. I like this. He said, but won't money spoil this? Now, this is the second time that this has come up. There was a point where Bill Wilson, again, was really struggling. And he went over to Towns Hospital, and Charlie Towns offered Bill a job as a lay therapist at Towns Hospital. And he said, we'll, give you a handsome salary. He said, dude, all these people you helping are getting back on their feet. You and Lois ain't got nothing. Y'all got drunks living in your house and eating your food. Come on, let me hook you up. Bill was excited by this. There was a meeting that night, 182 Clinton Street. Bill presented this to the group. And he said, as he was talking, their faces fell. And he said by the time he got to the end of it, his voice was just trailing off. And one of the guys looked at him and told him, he said, Bill, we love you. We are all very concerned about what's going on with you and Lois, but you cannot take money for this. You will kill it. And Bill said he knew that they were right. And so now they're talking to these folk that are connected to John D. Rockefeller, and Albert Scott said, won't money kill this? And Bill said, well, maybe, but, right? They're trying to justify moving on with this. So eventually they have this meeting, and you have all these money people there, and they decided the best way to do it was for the alcoholics to tell their story. That was how this thing worked, right? The most effective thing is simply telling our story. So they told their story, and, all the rich people was very impressed. Till Willie Richardson got upset. We thank everybody for coming, but you all know this is a work of Christian charity, and therefore it needs no money. And all the money got up and walked out the room. Bill Wilson said $2 billion walked out the room. Manna from heaven. So we were down to the book. Right? The alcoholics decided not to go to a publisher, that we should own our own book. They sold a bunch of worthless stock. They called it Works Incorporated or whatever, right? So they sold a bunch of worthless stock. Somehow they managed to get the book printed. Bill wrote the 12 steps. They basically were a 6-step deal at that time. And he laid down with a notepad, and he was like, I got to put this. So here's the thing. At that time, everybody that they were working with was personally, right? And so there were things, you could take those 6 steps that they had, and there were things like also they were doing, but they were doing it in person, right? But what they realized with the book was that everything had to be detailed because they weren't going to be there. And so Bill just starts writing like, this is everything we're doing. And when he got done, he counted them, and there was 12. The first chapters of the book, he started sending around, and New York would look at him, Akron would look at him. That was taking too long. When he got to the 12 steps, when he got to how it works, there was some more commotion. And basically he said, either you let me write the book or you write it. And you know what alcoholics, when you ask them to do something and you offer to do it, they're like, go ahead, you write it. So Bill completed the manuscript. So now we got this book. Something then happened in Cleveland, Ohio, around 1940. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, there was a guy who played baseball for the Cleveland Indians who was a real drinker and hellraiser. His name was Raleigh Hemsley. And the sports writers used to travel on the train with the baseball team in those days. And in order to get stories, all they did was follow Raleigh Hemsley around because he did something every night, right? So all of a sudden, Raleigh ain't going out. Raleigh ain't doing nothing. What had happened, Raleigh had got in trouble. The Indians was about to let him go. They put him on he did something in Detroit. They put him on a train, sent him back to Cleveland. And when he got to Cleveland, he got off the train, and there was 2 guys from the Cleveland Indians waiting on him. They said, we're taking you to see a guy in Akron, and they took him to Dr. Bob. And he became a member of this fellowship. And he got sober. And all of a sudden, he wasn't going nowhere and doing nothing. And they asked him, dude, like, what's going on with you? You ain't drinking no more? And he told them. So a series of articles was written in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. 7 consecutive days about this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. And even though there had been other articles written prior to that, Fulton Ausler had written some stuff, it didn't have this kind of impact. Alcoholics Anonymous exploded in the city of Cleveland. Hundreds and hundreds of inquiries came in. Cleveland is the first central office. They had to set up a central office to handle all this stuff. All this stuff is going on. Dr. Bob and Bill are watching this because this is Clarence Snyder's territory. And they said later, because nothing like this had ever happened, it took them 5 years to get 100 people. Well, 4 years, 35 to 39, to get 100 people. Dude getting 100 people a week. And they was like, we have no experience with this. And they kind of threw their hands up and said, we're just going to watch and see what Clarence do. And this is what Clarence did. Clarence started to rent out rooms like, well, not this big, but decent-sized rooms and halls. And they would bring in 40 or 50 people at a time. And they would take them through the steps. Then they bring in another 40 or 50. Take them through the steps. When this started, Cleveland AA consisted of 12 men. There was 12. Now they're getting hundreds. So after doing this for a while, they told them, they said, look, let's start, because we know the importance for our own sobriety of working with others, let's start working with individuals. Let's start working one-on-one with people. You guys have been taken through it. Cleveland was the first time that the book Alcoholics Anonymous was used to take people through the steps. You can read this in AA Comes of Age. So out of this whole thing in Cleveland came a couple pretty clear things. Number one, the steps were the key, of course. Number two, that alcoholics could be taken through and indoctrinated in AA through the book, and that AA could grow exponentially effectively. Okay. That's what came out of Cleveland. So you got this going on in Cleveland, and Clarence is just all over the place. And AA starts to grow. The book is 39, right? Starts going out in the mail. That book went to Los Angeles. That book went to Denver. That book went to Dallas. That book went to Miami. And so what happens? 2s and 3s and 5s of us start popping up, right? And AA begins, it says in our book, we found out that the message could be transmitted by mail as well as by word of mouth. I want to share something right quick. We coming out of a very rough time the last couple years, okay? And a lot of people thought, oh, Lord, all the new people are going to die. We ain't got meetings. Really? What about the time when there wasn't any meetings? I'm going to share something with you. There was a man in my home group. His name was John Cunningham. John got sober in 1945. He started treatment programs for alcoholics in Northwest Ohio. That's from Toledo all the way to where I'm at. John was a pioneer in this thing. He was in my home group. I said to John one day, man, what did y'all do when there wasn't hardly no meetings? John turned and looked at me like I had 3 heads. He said, what did we do when we didn't have any meetings? He said, Kent, we got together as often as we could, but we prayed like crazy, and we relied on God, and we tried to help whoever we could. He said, son, these meetings are a luxury. Be grateful for them. But if this is what you're dependent on, he said, you're in a lot of trouble. God has always given us what we need. Anybody ever stop to think that when this whole pandemic took place, we had the capability to be able to have meetings face-to-face, electronically? What if this would have happened in 1975? I'm sure God would have provided a way, but do you get my point? God always provides what we need. This ain't about us. So Alcoholics Anonymous grows. The book goes out. Groups start. So, Alcoholics Anonymous begins to face some problems and some issues, right? And out of these problems and issues were born the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous that are behind me, right? I want to say something, right? Things like anonymity. This was a big thing even back in the 30s. Let me say this about anonymity. One of the things with the Oxford group was they were very public, right? I always say that the Oxford group wasn't for down and outers, it was for up and outers. It was like they targeted, like wealthy people because of their influence, and that's what they thought would help spread their message. This is for up and outers, right? And so there was a lot of public, right? And the alcoholics were very wary of that. And Bill Wilson always said, look, that, if an alcoholic gets drunk, it discredits, right, who we, our fellowship. Because people don't understand why the person got drunk. They just know they went out publicly, said there's an AA, now they're drunk. So this AA thing must not work, right? So we have the principle of anonymity. And there's a lot more to go with it than that, right? See, a lot of things come under question. And Alcoholics Anonymous in 2021 that was settled 60, 70 years ago. Any society that does not know and learn from its history is doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. We shouldn't even be talking about this stuff. That's not a criticism. What it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity. I look at it as an opportunity to find creative ways. That's why I do that with the book study. To find creative ways to get this to people who aren't getting it from sponsorship. Opportunities. It's not criticisms. People can only give what they've been given. But what I have found is when you share this stuff, we did a workshop before COVID on the concepts. Janelle was there. I told my sponsor, Ronnie, make about 30 inverted triangles and print them out. If we get 30 people, I will be amazed. And the hall was full. And the first thing I said when I got up is, y'all looking for something, ain't you? And they was like, mm-hmm. And there was people in there from 4 months sober to 45 years. Who just don't know because no one shared it with them. And what a wonderful day we had that day. Well, these are opportunities. Meetings grew. In Akron, you had to take a surrender before you could attend a meeting in the early days. You had to surrender. New York, you did not. Akron, you had to surrender. And Bill said, I wish we had done that. What did they do in Akron? Let's talk about that real quick before we wrap this thing up for you in the early days. Well, you got a prospect. Let's get him in the hospital. We get old Sister Ignatian in there, sneak him in there some kind of way. Gastroenteritis or some lie, right? We get that alcoholic in here. We know he ain't going to pay the bill. So we got him in there. And this is what they would do. Every day, they send 2 guys in to see him. These are your early members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And 2 guys come in there. And they sit. And what they do is they tell them their story. Just the story, right? We would call it a drunkalogue, okay? They tell them. One tells it, the other one tells it. And then they get up and they leave. They use terms like mental obsession, allergy of the body, right? Then they get up and leave. Next day, 2 more come. Same thing. Just every day. Just pounding this poor guy in the bed, right? On the last day, Friday, here come Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob will come in, sit on the bed. So, what do you think, young fella? I don't know. Well, Dr. Bob said, well, tell me a little something. And Dr. Bob said they would start to talk to him because what had happened, what was the purpose of that? To establish identification. And he said that the guys would start talking to him using the same terms that they had been hearing all week. They would talk about it, I got this obsession. And here's what happened. I would go to work, right? So they started making it personal. Dr. Bob's nodding his head, right? We're looking at step 1, right? Step 2, these guys are sober. You think that can happen for you? Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I've seen it every day, step 2. Dr. Bobby, like, well, do you believe in God? Well, Dr. Bobby, I asked you all that. Do you? Well, I believe it's something. Dr. Bobby said, that's good enough. Let's get down on our knees and let's ask for help. And that's what they did. And after that, you would be allowed to come to a meeting. Okay? This then moved on to 855. And this was going on when they was bringing alcoholics in the house, and the meeting, when it left T. Henry's, it went to the house first. Akron AA left the Oxford group in 1939. They went to Dr. Bob's house. There was too many people, and they ended up going to the King School, where they are to this day. But they would go over there, and at Dr. Bob's house, they'd take them upstairs to Sue's room, the surrender room. There are people in this room right here who have taken that third step in that room, haven't we? I'm looking at him. I see Michael over here, Craig over here, Don. I know he's been in there. When they took that third step in that room, that was the surrender room. And so in the early days, that was kind of what they did in Akron. And then you got you into the meeting. Again, until early 1940s, there was no sponsorship. Then the sponsorship ethic was developed. And this is what they said about sponsorship. Now, this came out of Cleveland, early 40s. An alcoholic, this is a sponsor, who has made some progress in the recovery program, shares that experience. You cannot transmit what you do not have. Shares that experience on a continuous individual basis with another alcoholic who is attempting to attain or maintain sobriety through AA. And that is the birth of sponsorship. And that's where it came from. A debt of gratitude to the people in Cleveland. I joined a home group after I hit bottom 3 months in AA. And I got these sponsors, Bill and Kenny. And I joined a group, Venice. It's a very, very old group. Started as an Oxford group meeting. And there was 4 guys in that group. So I want to talk about meetings for a minute. It talks about in our book, the atmosphere in the meeting, right? And people excited and people helping other people, the absence of intolerance of any kind, right? And so I joined this group with all these old men. My sponsor, Bill, this was all set up. I was set up the whole way. He recommended that group because them was his cronies. And they would tell everything I did. I couldn't get away with nothing. I joined that group, and they showed me how what's in the book happens in a meeting. They gave me the coffee commitment. First, when I signed the book, they said, you'll be here. This was an 8:30 meeting. You'll be here at 6 o'clock. You'll set up the tables and chairs. There's 250 people at this meeting. You'll put out the literature. You'll make the coffee. Well, I looked at it was an old Herb B. I said, how long I got to do that? Herb looked at me and said, we'll get back to you. So I did not sleep that week. And the reason is very simple. It's because I don't know how to make coffee. I never made coffee in my life. I never drank coffee in my life. So, I don't say nothing. I'm tossing and turning at night. Coffee. I'm at work. I work at Ford. I'm working on the line. And I'm envisioning people drinking the coffee. right? Who made this coffee, right? So finally, Friday night comes. I get there at 6 o'clock, and they are there. That's them 4 old guys. Sitting there, ha, 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 laughing and talking, watching me, right? Make sure I showed up for one thing. And I set up the tables and chairs. I put out the literature, and it's coffee time. We had 300 cuppers. So, I went to school. My mother used to call me the educated idiot. But anyway, there's a line in there with 100, so I know how much water to put in there. I'm cool with that. So I put the water in there. Now I'm holding the basket you put the coffee in my hands. Okay? Stay with me. I'm standing there staring at it because this is the moment of truth. And Herb said, "Hey, Kent, come over here for a minute." So I walk over with the coffee basket in my hands. And he said, "Hey, Kent," he said, "I don't know about you." He said, "But when I make 100 cupper, I put the coffee right about that line right there." He said, "How do you do it?" I said, "I do it just like that, Herb." Do you get it? They knew I did not know. Stay with me. They knew I didn't know. They didn't make me feel less than. They didn't make me feel stupid. They showed me how. When I read that part of the book about meetings, that's the example that I had. It's love. Those old guys invited me to their homes. When John, we took John to Founders Day because they had a countdown. It's the most humble man I've ever known. Because we wanted him to stand up. He was 57 years sober at that time. And so he went down, and as the countdown went on, and it was in the old Jar Arena, people sitting down, right? 55, a guy sit down, right? 56, all of a sudden, ain't nobody standing there but John. And I was sitting up in the top, and I was looking at John. And I thought, man, like, how cool for somebody like John. Right? A man who never, ever wanted any recognition for anything. And it was very cool. Countdowns are cool, right? And John sat down and the place exploded, and I thought it was cool. And John died about a year later. I got to know some of those guys and the power of their example and what they taught me about AA history. He came to the 12 and 12 one night with a first edition big book, a second edition big book, a first printing of the 12 and 12, and a bunch of pamphlets. And he had them sitting in front of him. I used to sit across from him at the 12 and 12, and when I sat down, he pushed them at me. And I looked at him, and I was like, dude, what's up with this? And he said, we're moving and downsizing, so, you can have that. I have room for it. And he was dying. Just kindness, the example of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I read our history, that's what we about, right? And that's what our meetings are about. And I learned that stuff from guys in the groups. They were very nice to me. And so, but the real question is, what do I do with that? Am I nice to people at meetings? Right? Do I try to make sure that they feel included? Do I try to make sure that they feel hopeful? Right? All the things that it talks about in our book. There is something that I want to read. Could you give me my phone, please? Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot. This is something that's not in the book, and I put it in my phone. But it's, thank you, Janelle. We're not sure which phone is which. We got the same one. But it's something that, I heard that. But it's something that I think is an appropriate way to end this. Our history and what we learn from it, right? Things like singleness of purpose, anonymity, right? All of the things that today, we struggle with some and we grapple with some, and we don't have to. All of that's been given us. It's in our literature. It's in our experience. And as sponsors, okay, I need to make sure the people I work with get those things, right, and are exposed to those things. So what I want to read is from something that was only in the first edition of the big book. And it was called Now We Are Thousands. And I want to read this, and this is how I want to close. One might elaborate for pages upon what has taken place in the past few years. Stories of spectacular recoveries, of intense spiritual experiences, of happy social contacts, of regained health, of hundreds who have returned to their churches, of families reunited, of seemingly impossible differences composed, of renewed business success. Such narratives might be set down by scores, nor should we fail to mention other hundreds who have quietly stopped drinking and resumed normal life. We could also tell of heartbreaking failures, of seeing those for whom we have formed great attachments continue to disintegrate before our very eyes. Such is the warp and woof of AA everywhere. God bless and thank you.